We are live. Welcome to a fireside chat with James Carpio. He has the Anarchy Zine. I've known James for a number of years, so we're going to probably go off the beaten path of some of the topics we're going to hit. James, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is awesome.
No, it's a good time. I've been, as I mentioned before we stepped into this, I've been doing a large number of fireside chats because of ZineQuest. Did I pronounce that right? Because I have this issue. I always want to say Zine because ZineQuest. It is ZineQuest. I always want to say Zine because of magazine, and it's a real mental hiccup I can't get past. All right, magazines, ZineQuest. There we go. There are, I was told, somewhere over 200 zines currently in ZineQuest 3.
Wow, that's quite a lot, actually.
Yes, and we're only at the 8th of the month, so I guess we have another 3 weeks to have people add to it. And just as a side note, I budgeted $250 for my ZineQuest backing, and I busted through that number, I think, on the 4th. So now I'm just kind of like, if I like it, I'll back it, and I'll worry about it later. That's what credit cards are for, right?
Yeah.
Maybe.
No, so far I think I've only backed one at this point, which was actually in something you posted that just caught my eye, and I immediately went and backed it, which was like Cat Apocalypse or something.
Oh yeah, Casey. I'll have Casey on Wednesday night with his daughter, Ainsley. Yeah, no, that looks bizarrely good.
Yeah, the cover sold me. I was like, all right, this, and again, I think anything with cat in it, I end up buying. So Cat Thulu, I ended up buying.
Okay.
So I think the word cat and a cute or awesome looking cat picture on the cover will usually get my money. So just anyone out there listening, you want to make money off of me, you want my wallet open,
Cats.
publish something with cats and RPGs, and you got me.
Yeah, it's now it's funny. If I was doing this last year, our old cat Ashley, we had to we were shortly at the end of the year, back in October, we had to have her put to sleep because she had cancer, but she was 15. But God bless her. And the same day, this literally the day after, we had a stray cat that we had, young girl, that we had been feeding outside. She always came up for attention. She decides to walk into the house. It's like she knew. My parents have 2 cats downstairs. We had to keep them to the side. And now she's perched to my left on her yes, hi baby, on her little cat home. So it's one thing. It's one thing. I've always been a cat person. It's the first time a cat chose me and said, "You know what? You might be good enough for me to leave the streets." Because she had a home before. She wants to escape from somebody. But yeah, maybe you and your wife, maybe you're good enough people that I'll make the sacrifice of coming off the streets and into this warm house right before wintertime. Oh my God, talk about timing. But so James, is this your first Kickstarter that you're running for yourself?
No, actually, this will be my third. So the first one was back in 2012. I went to publish a game called Spooky Beans, which was kind of a.
I remember that. Oh my God,
right. I was a big fan of Roman Dirge's comics, Serena Valentino, a big fan of Invader Zim. So me and my friend Ben Morgan decided to put together a role-playing game kind of inspired by that genre. Unfortunately, as much as we put into it, it was our first Kickstarter. We didn't quite understand how all the bells and whistles worked, and it never funded. We ended up actually just publishing it ourselves through IPR, Indie Press Revolution.
I remember IPR. I used to shop there a lot. Early Spirit of the Century and other stuff was up there. Yes, back when I was buying indie games until I realized I had too many fucking games.
And then the second one was in 2012 or 13 when I published Tales from the Fallen Empire for Dungeon Crawl Classics.
Okay, that's right. That one I have proudly on my shelf. It's a great setting for those folks who have not gotten a chance to look at it. But my gaming group at the time, uh, I think they got through 3 sessions with DCC before saying they liked the scenarios but didn't like the system, and I was like, "Fuck." So never got to use the setting, but it is a good one, and it's one of the few really swords and sorcery feel settings for the DCC game. Well, for Astonishing Swordsman and Sorcerer's Hyperborea is one for the OSR, but you did really well for that, and that was also at the beginning of the DCC RPG. So you hit your mark on that. You got to say you did great.
Yeah, no, but again, lessons learned with Kickstarter is that so that time I had just started, like I had an early manuscript when I ran the Kickstarter. And I think after that, I really learned my lesson in making sure that things were just a little bit more fleshed out before you run your Kickstarter. Because then you run into the Far West scenario where it's just kind of like
far West is in a world of its own. I mean, there aren't too many people that can actually say after 9 years, yeah, it's still coming. But I'm writing it in tweets because that's just, I can't get beyond 172 characters at a shot or whatever the tweet limit is now. I guess that's a unique situation.
Yeah, it's but anyway, just going back to that, it's again a lesson learned is that when you kickstart something, just kind of make sure you have something a little bit more fleshed out before pulling that trigger. Because then I spent like another close to a year just kind of at that point sweating, because while actually I had all the artwork in, the layout was all ready to go. It was just the writing that fell behind, and that's what kept it, from hitting like the actual deadline after it funded. But again, Kickstarter is a weird animal, and unless you really know how that system works and have experience with it, it's a really scary place to be. Like if you're just kind of doing it. Yeah.
And back then too, it was like the wild world of Kickstarter. You couldn't really rely upon others to give you advice. There weren't communities that you could come to or other creators because everybody was learning. And this is the time frame where we had, like the Mike Nystals doing 3 consecutive or overlapping Kickstarters, and Kickstarter even saying, "I don't see a problem with that," because nobody had really gotten a feel for it. I think a lot of it is trial and error, and somebody has to go through the trial and error for others to learn. So
yeah, shipping I think also is a big lesson with me. So with Tales from the Fallen Empire, I went in for international shipping, and I just imagine some nefarious, villainous Australian who basically said, "We're just going to flood his Kickstarter with orders, so he has to spend $24 per book to ship to our country." It killed me. I went like $1,000 over what I had budgeted, just pretty much to ship to like Australia and Brazil. Were like 2 of the huge like money grabbers for shipping.
And I think that Brazil is also infamous for lost packages.
Yep.
I've heard of that from people in Brazil who are kind of like, "Yeah, don't ship to me in Brazil. I've got a mailing address in a neighboring country, and when I go there twice a year, I'll pick it up." It's kind of like,
I can't think of his name, but he's a big supporter of the OSR. Maybe I want to say his name's Diego, but it may not be. But anyway, he always posts on Instagram, huge OSR person, but he actually bought a copy of my book, and even though it arrived in Brazil, it still took 2 weeks in customs before he could even get it.
nice. Not a corrupt system whatsoever. That's oh god. And it's funny too, because I mean, I've ordered stuff from, of all places, Finland with James Raggy.
Mhm.
And I've gotten stuff from, I live in New York City, but I've gotten stuff from James Raggy. One time, literally 48 hours after I ordered it, it was in my mailbox.
Wow.
And I was like, this, yeah. I mean, I have stuff that I've ordered from Goodman Games that will take a week, week and a half. And it's not, I'm not bitching about it. I'm just remarking that sometimes you just can't figure out how the shipping goes.
No, exactly. But yeah, I've ordered many stuff from James as well. Actually, my shelf has a pretty decent size Lamentations of the Flame Princess collection on it. I actually wrote a book for James that's still sitting on a hard drive somewhere. It was called The Colony. And this is pretty much, I think, shortly after I wrote Tales from the Fallen Empire. So The Colony was supposed to be a weird fantasy based on Roanoke.
Oh.
And so I did the manuscript. I think it was in the 3rd revision, and I sent it to James, and he goes, "It still doesn't have a weird quality to it."
It's fucking Roanoke. How much weirder you need to get than Roanoke? I'm sorry, just
and I think it was just mostly because he felt it was too linear, and there wasn't enough tables in it. And I sat and I messed around with it, and then I finally just shelved it. And then, you know, I don't even, I mean, last I heard that he was going into some problems and he was going to close shop, but I guess he didn't do that.
From what I understand is that he was, and I don't want to, he was many thousands of dollars, at least nearing 6 figures. He had debt coming up to the Finnish government. He had taken government loans out. They were coming due. The world of COVID hit him. The world of Zach Smith did his business. And he did a real push in the summertime. You know, basically, you know, I've got new stuff coming out, and we need to raise, I don't know, I want to say like $100,000 to basically save it to pay off the debt. And he raised enough that the business is still going. Although if you back for the ref book, you don't fucking know what's going on with that now. And I still remember when James put that up on Indiegogo and he set a date. And he's like, "Listen, the date I'm giving is bullshit date because there's no way it's going to take this long for me to fulfill this." And now years later, backers are still waiting for it. I suspect it's going to be really good because the original ref book is something that I use as inspiration and as a resource in any game I run in the OSR. It is simply that good, and I don't throw comments like that out about anything. It really is spot on. Even if I don't necessarily use the system itself, the ref book is well worth any money spent. So hopefully, maybe in 2021 we'll get a sighting of the ref book.
Yeah, I backed that. I was one of the backers, but I think if it's anything close to what he did for the Grindhouse edition, which I also have, the box set,
yes,
where he wrote actually a really decent referee section. If it's anything like that, it's then well worth it.
Yeah, I have both box sets from James because they're just way. Even though I find most of the recent adventures, especially ones written by James, to be, dare I say, party fucks, they are presented well. They're well written. You can't bitch about the production quality at all. Just that a lot of them are simply unplayable. Maybe they're playable as a convention game, where whether the party lives or dies doesn't matter. But if you use it in your home campaign, your party will probably want to kill you afterwards, and I don't like to have my gaming group want to tar and feather me. So
I've ran the grinding gear before, and I will say that
that's excellent. By the way, that is like Tomb of Horrors that you can actually possibly, if you play it well, not just survive, maybe even beat it. But okay, go ahead.
I was just going to say, no, my players purposely committed suicide in that adventure.
Oh, there you go.
My wife especially. There was one part where there's the obvious big red button in the dungeon,
Oh
and
God.
she went and pressed it and went squish, and then like after that everything else just kind of just fell
Yeah,
apart. But
people get punch drunk at that. It's like, oh, and that was actually one of those inside jokes of like, you put stuff in there because the players shouldn't be turning all the levers. And I used to always hate that in the old TSR adventures. We had to randomly step on tiles that there was no rhyme or reason as to why you should, and failure to do so correctly would lead in like the ceiling falling. But if you got it right, you got your +2 ring of protection. And really, it wasn't like you were going to find a scrap of paper giving you the clue as to how to successfully do this. So short of, I don't know, bringing your pack mules into the dungeon and having them walk along until they died, it required literal sacrifices of not just party resources, but of player characters to often solve that. And it was never my cup of tea. So that was, I guess, James's inside joke. It's a big red button. You know you shouldn't push it. You know it. There's no reason to push it. There's no clue that says push it. No sign. It's like, yeah, but I'm a player. I gotta push the button. Oh my God. So now my question to you, and I'm guessing there's some similar background to us because I was reading the page for your Anarchy Kickstarter, and your 80s sound a lot like my 80s, where it was going to Lemoore East or Lemoore's in Brooklyn or CBGB's, and seeing bands like the Ramones, and that was, I mean, my hair was maybe a little bit longer than it is at home, but I was probably the most or the least radical looking of my group of friends. We had the shaved heads, we had the long hair down to the waist. They all have real like shirt and tie jobs and major positions with major companies these days. But back in the day, we were on that edge, whether it was heavy metal or punk rock. That was our scene. So Anarchy looks like it is going to be something that embraces that. Where did the idea come from?
so pretty much what you're saying. So I grew up in the 80s. I was 16 in 1984, and those years were filled with going out to Chinatown, buying wild Irish rose for $1 because
Nice.
the owner of the store didn't care how old I was, and Chinatown was right next to
You,
Broadway.
you look like you could shave in a year or two, maybe. You're good enough. And your drinking age was 18 back then. So really, he said he was 22. I was good.
So yeah, so we used to go down to, myself, my friend Ophelia, and my friend Manuel. We used to go meet on Broadway and drink up on the stairs on Kearney Street. And then we had the Mabuhay Gardens, which was at one time in the 70s, it was a Filipino restaurant that ultimately became one of the well-known punk clubs of in San Francisco. Across the street was the Keystone, which bands like Metallica kind of got their start, and
Right.
Megadeth and a lot of them. And then upstairs from Mabuhay was the On Broadway, which Dirk Dirksen, who was kind of the punk rock version of Bill Graham. So I think Bill Graham was also on the East Coast too, right? During that time?
I believe so. Never saw him, but I do actually remember seeing a poster or two slapped to a light pole in Manhattan when you were down by CBGB's, because you always had the upcoming bands and performers, and they were like always plastered everywhere. Oh God.
So I definitely had embraced the punk scene. I kind of lived it in my teenage years. I believe it or not, I had an orange mohawk, leather jacket, the spikes. I even actually had to go to a different school during high school because they didn't quite understand my whole punk look. And I went out to a school out in the suburbs for high school that was a little bit more skate punk and whatever friendly.
Okay.
So, but anyway,
I see that.
But the music was intense. I mean, I love the Dead Kennedys. I was into, TSOL. God, in San Francisco had just an amazing collection of just independent punk bands that were in the Bay Area. And it just stuck with me. So let's move ahead to like a few months back, and my friend Jason Elliott, the head of TSR, he told me about ZineQuest because I had no idea what it was. And the first thing that clicked in my mind was I was a big fan of a magazine called Maximum Rock and Roll, which was kind of the punk zine that looked like someone Xeroxed the hell out of it and then stapled it together. It had like the kidnapper type letters across it to spell out everything. And when he said ZineQuest, that's the first thing that popped in my mind, is like an old punk zine. And ultimately, then I was just going, well, wouldn't it be neat just to do an old punk zine and just get that style and feel again, and do an RPG? And eventually, it wasn't even an RPG. I was like, I just want to do an old punk zine, and that's just like, maybe I should do a punk zine that's an RPG. So Anarchy was kind of born at that point.
Well, that's actually pretty cool. It looks like it's got a nice hook in it. Is that I remember as a kid in the late 70s and early 80s, and the current generation, that's not what I'm going to be talking about. You had to do the air raid drills in school, where the alarm would go off and you'd have to leave the classroom and line up in the hallway away from the glass, because we were still in the midst of this Cold War. And the Cold War was very hot. They might have said it was cold, but that you, as a kid, if you even watched the news occasionally, because again, back in that time frame, most people did not have cable. You watched what your parents were watching on the one TV. Yep. And that means, oh, okay, well, now it's time for the evening news. Everybody sit down and listen to Walter Cronkite. And you see the latest events going on in the world. And it was always like, oh, my God, is this going to lead to somebody pushing the fucking button? And what would happen? And you thought about it. Even as a teenager, you thought, it wasn't like today where I feel right now is COVID, but there's a certain security in what we have now compared to when you had two countries that were always ready to, as we thought, nobody wanted to be the person left out. Like, oh wait, they sent missiles and we didn't. All you need is one stupid mistake, and we live that. So to look at what your write-up is for Anarchy and see that default setting and remember that time and that feeling, it is it's all I can read the description and go, I could have lived that. Thank God I didn't, but I could have.
Yeah, I mean, the fear of nuclear war at that time was real. And if, Gen Xers remember this the best, is that if you were basically of the brat pack age of, being in your teenage years in the 80s, you feared that either the Iranians were going to get us, the Russians were going to get us, Reagan was going to say one wrong thing, and suddenly we're going to get rained on. And then 1983... the day after was put out on an ABC.
Oh my God, I forgot about that movie. Oh jeez.
And that movie terrified me. So I would have to say almost a year after, I would lay awake and listen to my radio at night on my boombox and fall asleep just waiting to hear that emergency broadcast system thing come over the radio. And thank God it never did, but and you kind of said something about, fear of COVID today. That, I think, sure, we're afraid of it. We have preventions to get it. But there was a helplessness to the feeling that we had with that threat, because we had no control.
You had no control. And it could literally have been your first realization of what's happening would have been, hey, what's that light? Oh, oh shit. I mean, it would be like there'd be nothing you could do. COVID, you can take precautions. Yes, it's fucked up the world. Yes, it's led to a lot of isolation and other issues, but it isn't like the idea of, wow, we have a nuclear war. The best option, I used to think when I was, back in the mid '80s, I was like, wow, the best option against nuclear war is that I live in New York City, and I won't survive the first strike, which is probably the best because you read fiction or you read popular science or one of the other magazines out there that would maybe have articles on it. You'd be like, oh, I don't want to be a survivor, because if you're a survivor, it's going to be even worse than if you were already dead. Shit.
So the city of San Francisco published a pamphlet in probably around that time, 83, 84. And it drew the Bay Area out, and it drew these rings. And it talked about, if you were in this ring, you would be instantly vaporized. If you were in this ring, you would probably be blind from the flash, even if you closed your eyes. And you would suffer radiation burns, and your lifespan would be blah, blah, blah. If you were in this ring, you had this percentage chance to not be blind and survive radiation. And it was weird. But it was an actual published pamphlet from the city of San Francisco that warned about what the effects would be if a bomb hit ground zero in San Francisco.
That is it is such again, people, my son's generation. My son is 28, and yes, he grew up with 9/11 happened. I still remember. I was working and coming by, and then he's giving me this drawing of force fields to protect the buildings, because this is, he had it planned out how we're going to protect against further planes crashing into the towers, and that was his reality. 9/11 was what he grew up with.
Yeah,
and 9/11 was. I was down there. I reported to it. I was when the buildings came down. Scary ass shit. I still have. I don't want to say post-traumatic. I'm not saying I have PTSD, but I certainly think about it often. But if you were growing up in the 80s and 70s, the 80s, this was on your mind constantly, because just like in some ways COVID is on the news all the time, this discussion was always being discussed on TV. The talking heads were always talking about, in the case of a nuclear war, take shelter. Nuclear blast. People used to have, in their backyards, in certain areas, they'd have their own fallout shelters built. There's something else you could find in Popular Mechanics. Instructions on how to build your own shelter and stock it up, so you can wait out the nuclear winter that's going to happen. So Anarchy really, when I read the write-up on it on Kickstarter, I was like, again, like I said, holy crap, this is, a woulda, coulda, thank God wasn't, but with the twist to it. And where did that twist come from?
So the twist just kind of came from me being a huge D&D nerd. So
I should have guessed.
So I thought about it, and I was going, well, this could be kind of one of those grim, realistic sort of things where it's like, all right, we're going to wander the wastelands and fight other survivors. And I'm going, nah, I rather have, like Secret Service guys and demons and whatever else I can think of. So I kind of just took a little bit of a nod towards Gamma World when thinking about it, just kind of going with a gonzo post-apocalyptic feel. So in Anarchy, what ended up happening is those who survived were able to tap into what I'm calling the dark mana, or anarchy, which is kind of the radiation changed people, mutated, caused this like weird energy thing to happen. So people manifest their anarchy in different ways. Some people might have gotten really strong from it. Some might have mutated into other creatures. Like I have an example in there called the Mole Men, which are mutants. Some people are actually able to take that radiation and create like a change reality, which is kind of more of a magic effect. So while yes, it's based on something that was real horrible that could have happened, it's more of kind of a weird, I don't know, post-apocalyptic gonzo fantasy version of that. So
Okay. And I guess your core mechanic is extremely simple. You explained it on the Kickstarter page.
yeah,
So
there's two ways of doing it. I call it the soft core and the hardcore. Soft core is really simple. You just basically pick the trait that you want to use. You roll the dice, and basically, depending on rolling low is really good, and you only need one die to be really low. So if you rolling 3 dice, one of those dice is a 1, a 5, and a 6. You rolled a 1, you did really well.
okay.
If you roll like a 4, 5, and a 6 on those 3 dice, then yeah, you failed. And I have like a little chart that kind of outlines it. So it's just simple. You need to resolve something really quick. Grab your trait, roll it. If you get a low number, you're awesome. The hardcore is more of based on a threshold. So there's two ways of doing it. You're going to use your trait, as with the softcore version. However, when you roll the dice, you're going to basically keep track of certain successes, because that's going to build up the anarchy or the dark mana. And ultimately, as you're rolling, you're going to build up this larger pool of dice that you can use. So while your trait might be 3, depending on what you're doing, you might end up with 6 additional dice to roll. And how you do that is simply based on so if I'm going to go up and punch somebody, that's going to be my 3 dice. However,
Okay.
if I'm going to go up and punch somebody with brass knuckles, that's going to be an extra dice. If I'm flying off of a bar while using brass knuckles, so now I have brass knuckles, which is 1 die, flying off the bar is 2. And as I build a narrative around what I'm doing, I'm just going to keep stacking extra dice on there. But in order for me to do that, I have to be creative and just continuously add to that scene. Otherwise, sure, if I want to be boring and punch somebody, I got my trait. If I want to be really cool and describe to the game master what I'm doing in this epic tale of how I'm
Right.
doing it, I'm going to continue to stack extra dice. So my dice pool is going to be massive. And then I'm going to roll those dice and, add up the successes and try to beat a threshold. Or if it's contested, and obviously, mooks or goons or whatever you want to call them are pretty simple. You just kind of overcome a threat with them. But what I call the big bads are basically built like characters. So the GM and the player are just going to go on this like narrative, I don't know, war, just to build up dice pools in order to just go at it.
That's a pretty interesting way to handle that. And it sounds like it should play fairly fast and loose, which is another fun thing to do.
Yeah.
And that's nice. And there's as I'm thinking about it, it sounds like a fun game for conventions, because it really allows players to push the limits of the system without the concern of will I survive to play the next session, or am I going to get you push it and you go all out, and that's fun. And the ability as a GM to decide how deep you're going to go with the rules allows you to reflect that on your gaming group. We all know our gaming groups. We know how deep they want to go. So I like that option.
Yeah, and the one thing I like about, going to OSR versus modern is a lot of modern is all preset and prepackaged. So sure, you can do things when you choose it from the list, but I'm someone who just really doesn't like to choose things from lists. I like to be able to say, all right, this is what I'm going to do in this scene, and either the game master is going to let me do it or they're
Yep.
not going to. And that's what I built it around. So the more wild, crazy stuff that you can throw out there on your character's action, the bigger a dice pool you can build.
I like that. That does again. That's more of the rulings, not rules type of OSR feel to it, and that is cool.
Yeah, and also I've been lucky enough, So I kind of picture this as an OSR project, even though it's not particularly built around, you know, old D&D or anything like that. It's kind of its own system. But I even want the because I mean, honestly, I started gaming in the early 80s, and like the Mulvey Cook box set was like my first D&D game.
Okay.
So my experiences were with that style of gaming. So I was lucky enough to be able to bring on James V. West and
Oh,
uh,
good artist.
and James Hansen, who did some stuff for Barbarians of the Ruined Earth,
Okay.
as artists on this. So it's also going to have a very cartoony and OSR-y sort of feeling to the artwork that's going to be in there as well.
Okay, that's spot on. Damn.
Yeah.
Now,
And then the rest of it's going to look like old punk posters. So that's, so it'll be a mixture. Yeah.
See, that sells to me pretty much perfectly because, well, I never would have gotten away with spiked hair, so that's why I kind of went with the long unkempt hair and the silver chains. Although I was more of the flannel at the time. My God, I own too many flannel fucking shirts because you were that period too is trying to find your identity while identifying with this nebulous, not movement, but this community that was punk and metal and hard rock, and it all kind of overlapped. And whereas you'd have your one friend who would wear, the leather with, all the metal attachments to it. Then you'd have the other with sometimes, the spiked hair and always wearing the shirts with no sleeves on it. I was I guess almost the grunge look, I guess we would say now. I never thought about that. Oh, geez, I'm 53 and I was doing the grunge look back in the 80s on the East Coast, not even in Seattle. Jeez. But I'm looking forward to this. This sounds like a lot of fun. And just, again, the setting itself, I can't call it nostalgia, or I can, but it's nostalgia for something that, thank God, never happened.
Yeah.
But I was sure would, if that makes any sense.
No, I mean, I think anyone of our age range was convinced that the bomb was going to drop at any point.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like the 50s or the 60s either, where there was this delusion of duck and cover, where it's just like, oh, atomic bomb, I'll just go and hide under my desk and I'll be completely fine. I'll cover my eyes.
Right. It's like, yeah, no big whoop. They'll have these new helicopters in to deliver food and water real quickly. Or, hey, your subways are your bomb shelter. No, they're not.
Yeah, the 80s was more kind of like, yeah, no, if the bomb hits, you're going to be dead. So, you can, go wait in the hallway, whatever, but that's where you'll die.
Yeah. No. I used to think about that with because my school was built in I think like the 1930s, or it was like pre-World War II. So it was glass everywhere. And even with the fire doors had glass above them to let light through. And I was always thinking, wow, but if a bomb, if it was a big enough blast, and again, it wasn't a bomb because this would be an atomic bomb. So you weren't in that initial, you were just getting hit with the shock, the force. I was like, if it blows out the windows of the classroom, isn't it going to blow out the pressure? Isn't that going to blow out the glass in these hallways? Doesn't it kind of defeat the purpose to put us in a hallway? I was like, I'd be better off under my desk. But we didn't hide under desks. You had to do these. And we also had fire drills. I will say we had those. But no, we also had these air raid bomb drills. Like the Soviets were going to drop a conventional bomb on the outer borough of Queens. It wasn't going to happen. Wow. So now, James, do you have any other projects lined up? Out of curiosity, since we have you here.
Right now, I'm looking at a couple of things that I want to get accomplished. So I have two adventures for Top Secret New World Order that need to get finished, but it's just been kind of 2020 wasn't a really great year for the I don't know how to put it. for excitement of doing anything other than just kind of moping. So
yeah, it was hard to focus in 2020. I will say that. Yeah, 2020. If I could take a year and just say goodbye, erase you from memory, we should have all have been in a coma for 2020 and just rebooted in 2021. Is my
but
feeling.
a couple of things that I'm really excited about, though, that I want to make happen this year are so one is a project called Tools of Magic, which I've been working on, God, since probably around 2007, which I refer to as Wicca Punk, which is a setting where it's pagan superheroes.
Oh,
So that's kind of one of the things that I've been playing around with for a while. And the second one is pretty much I need to get done, or Jen Brinkman will probably drive out here to Connecticut and beat me senseless, which is Tales from the Fallen Empire second edition.
oh, nice. Yes. Again, Tales from the Fallen Empire, an excellent setting book, and dare I say, I guess, and if you're gonna do a second edition on that, dude, I'm almost loath to say this. You might want to do DCC and 5e. God, I hate saying that.
No, don't,
But
because right now I am on this like really weird fence of how I want to do it. I mean, it'll definitely be DCC again, but whether I do a 5e conversion in it, or there's another system that I'm very, very fond of called Barbarians of Lumeria,
I remember that. I have a print copy somewhere on my shelf.
which is a beautiful system done by Simon Washbourne. And the only reason I was actually going to do a version of it at the time, but one, I just didn't really want to do a conversion, and two, Simon's fees for using the system, because it was a licensed system
Oh,
at the
okay.
time, were just a little too high. So it's just kind of like, well, maybe not. But DCC, so on the fence about 5e, because 5e right now is kind of the popular, like all the cool kids play it sort of thing.
It's the rising tide that lifts all ships. Because of course, the other option is to write the core book as system neutral, and then have supplements for DCC for the parts that need rules or 5e.
Midgard, Kobold Press does that with their Midgard setting, where the core campaign book is system neutral, and then there's the 5e Heroes book, and then there's also the Pathfinder's Heroes book.
And there's a Swords and Wizardry supplement for that too.
Oh, is there? Okay.
Yes.
So that's probably a good way to look at it. Is because I mean 5e is probably still going to remain popular for a while, but when I look at things like Deadlands D20 and kind of cringe at the fact that they thought that this was a good, and I think even Shane Hendley at some point had said that that wasn't the greatest or brilliantest of ideas to do a Deadlands D20 version, because ultimately it just, it failed on so many levels. But and that's my biggest fear is, you go out and say, all right, cool, I just made this for 5e, and then, something happens, or 5e is no longer the little darling of role players anymore, and then suddenly it just kind of falls into this obscure thing.
Well, it's funny because even with like the Lost Land setting for Frog God Games, and I love the Lost Lands, when they finally put out the the reference book, the hardcover, it was system neutral. So you can take it and you can run anything from Swords and Wizardry to 5e to Pathfinder to GURPS with it, because if you're going to be playing 5e or I think even Pathfinder, there are supplements for it that add the crunch in. But let's be honest, I mean, how much crunch do you need in a setting book generally? So I think that the option of going system neutral, and hey, you could even license out the system specific to other creators if you wanted to. Sure, you want to write it there, you do the work. I'll just sit back and enjoy the results.
Yeah,
But
because I mean, there's so many great systems out there. Savage Worlds is one I know I enjoy a lot. It's Green Ronin published Fantasy Age
yep,
a few years back, which is another system that I absolutely love, but never can find anyone who wants to play it. So
I devoured that when it initially came out as was it Dragon Age?
yep, it
I
came
was
with the
just like,
dragon.
oh, that first box set, I was like, wow, there's just so much I could do with this. It just was very inspirational. But then again, I'm somebody that still looks back at Green Ronin's True 20 and their settings and settings for that, and I really should just go back and see if I can rip those settings away from True 20 and use it with the OSR rule set of my choice because I love the settings. They were short settings, but they were inspirational. Maybe the system itself wasn't perfect, but the material that went along with it was damn good.
Yeah, they did one called Damnation Decade, which I was very fond of, which was kind of a 70s-esque sort of thing that they did.
So those are all options.
Yeah.
But definitely, I mean, I don't think anybody but Goodman Games has done settings for DCC aside from you. I can't think of any.
There's like Under the Broken Moon, which
Oh
is
yeah, which kind of goes that you can call Calastics. It's kind of, but the fantasy side, Under a Broken Moon is kind of the weird. It's Sword and Planet, I guess maybe.
yeah. Well, I think it's more like Thunder the Barbarian-ish.
Yeah, yeah. 80s cartoons for those of us. But and you have that, and you have or Darker Trails, which just got renamed, but that's Western. But for a fantasy type of default ability setting, I don't think there is one. Not even from Goodman. They've put out settings, but they don't. You can't go. Okay, well, this could be any sword and sorcery type setting. They really don't. You have it. You seem to have that niche to yourself. So
yeah. So second edition is something that has been on my mind because there's a whole other continent. There's different changes that obviously after I published the initial setting, I read over it again. And I'm going, I could have did this so much better, or I really didn't describe this part yet, or so there's a lot more that can be done with it. A lot more stories to tell.
very cool. I'm looking forward to it because
Awesome.
I really enjoyed the first edition, and now you got me thinking. I'm thinking of I should pull that off my shelf and maybe do the good old convert on the fly and run it with Swords and Wizardry, or as an inspiration because it was just a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Well, you're welcome, James. Thank you. I really I appreciate you taking time out of your day to come on and yap with me. Normally we get a chance to catch up at various conventions, but yeah, we haven't had that opportunity in 2020.
Yeah, I'm hoping Gamehole happens. That would be so awesome just to go to a live convention at the end of the year.
You're not the first person that said that I've actually sat down with, and it's like, like, are you going to be at Gamehole? I'm like, well, if there is a Gamehole, I'll be at Gamehole because Rach loves Gamehole, and we'll never miss a Gamehole. Gamehole is just so well run.
It is.
It is like a Swiss clock mechanism or Swiss watch mechanism. There's never a hiccup. Everything is spot on, and if you need to find Alex, you can find Alex. He's never so overwhelmed that you can't find him. You might not be able to grab much of his time, but you can grab him.
No, absolutely.
Well, James, again, thank you. Folks that are listening at home, you've probably listened to 2 firesides today because I did 2 today. And tomorrow I have at 11 a.m. Frank Tuffler, the lair of the Manticore, And at 8 p.m., we have Nathan Robert, 13th Fleet. And I think there's 2 more on Wednesday with Lloyd Metcalf in the morning and Tom Wilson joining myself and Bad Mike in the evening. We have the Fireside. If you want anything to know about ZineQuest, you're going to find him here. All right. On that note, we're going to punch out. Later, folks.
Goodbye.